St. Paul's in Winston-Salem, another Gothic Episcopal church that was built in the mid-1800s. They got new windows, so these windows here on the side came from St. Paul's, as well as those transit windows in the back. These pews were really simple, but those also came from a church in New Jersey and shipped down. These are the original pews. Almost everything is original here. Hey, Christine. Almost everything is original here except for the carpet on the floor. Oh, come on in. We'll go to where you go. I know you're good. Oh, you're good. The original baptismal font where the holy water is, that was gifted. The first child baptized, person baptized here was also another relative of mine, Cora Fulton, was baptized here in 1886, first baptism. But the church has always been very small. You know, we're called a mission. We're not an actual parish. You know, we're ruled by the bishop of the diocese. What else can I tell you about this church? This area here that you're sitting in is called the nave. You go up these steps here, that area there is called the chancel. And in back of that altar rail, that's where people kneel, of course, to take communion. And behind the altar rail, that's called the sanctuary. And then that's where the altar is placed. The lamp that's always lit indicates that there's the presence of Christ, communion, consecrated wafers or wine that's in the thing. If you see on the side wall there in the sanctuary, there's a little box that's called a tabernacle or an aumbrey. That's where you put consecrated host that's not consumed. There's also a Sanctus bell that was added at a certain point, and then other lights, and then two things. This little door here goes into an area that's called a sacristy, and that's where Christine was just coming to do her work to set up the altar for next week's service. That's where all this stuff is kept. What other things can I answer questions on? I have a lot, and I'll give you the sheet too if you want it, about all the architecture. But all these churches planted up here, if you remember, and I know Leslie does, there used to be a church in Germantown called St. Philip's, which looked exactly like this. The same priest planted it, and this was a priest named Lacey Umstead. He came down from New York. He was based out of St. Paul's in Winston, and he planted lots of little churches here. And within a year of this church actually being consecrated, he died of tuberculosis consumption. He was only 33 years old. But the church in Germantown, they never really had a full congregation there for a number of years. And then the diocese, the Baptist church in Germantown, wanted to buy it. But then they decided they didn't want to use the building. But there was a church in Carrboro, North Carolina, an Episcopal church, that actually got a large gift and spent about $1 million taking that church apart and moving it piece by piece to Chapel Hill to Carrboro. And it's rebuilt there now, this Church of the Nativity, I think it's called.
Do they have a good congregation, or do you know thriving? That's good. That's
good.
They
do. And it's beautiful, the restoration of that church. The incredible thing about St. Philip's in Germantown, it never had electricity. It never had anything. So they would always have church during the day, otherwise they couldn't see without the lamps and lights and so forth. But I'm trying to think of other things to tell you. Let me look at my notes here. Are y'all visiting all the old churches in Walnut Cove or in Stokes County?
what have we been to? Danbury. We've been to the Clark Memorial Presbyterian, which was the black church in Danbury. Then we went to the Danbury Presbyterian Community Church. What else didn't we go to another one?
Did you go to I saw in the paper you went to the Methodist
That's
church
it. Yeah. We went
That's
to.
an old one. Too.
Yes. Jerry Rutledge did a little historical lesson on that one.
That's right. And
I don't know if we've been anywhere else.
And you know, and a lot of these Baptist churches in Stokes County are really old, but a lot of them aren't in their original buildings, right?
Right.
You know, but this is, and it is difficult to keep this sucker up.
And this may be the oldest, this is the oldest original church, right?
It's still stamped,
Still
in its
used
original
and-
construction.
yeah.
And this building next to it, the parish hall, that was added in 1941. We were listed on the National Historic Register in 2006, maybe 2005, something like that. It's a pretty church. It's small. Our congregation today is about 25 communicants. That's it. It's very small. Let's see what other. Anybody have any questions? The interesting thing about this church, it kind of, initially when it had its biggest membership right before in the 1920s and the 1930s. And then Walnut Cove, especially after World War II, started seeing a shift in population down, right? And that kind of continued for a long time. It had a major shift in population down when the railroads left, and that kind of changed. It used to be people would come to Walnut Cove on the railroad, and then they could take a train to take them up to the hotels up in Danbury at Hanging Rock and the Saratown Mountains. There were, what were they called, Leslie?
The hot spring, yeah.
Springs, things like that. None of those, except for Vedamika, none of them exist anymore.
Yeah.
Most of them burned down as well. And so people would come here just to get away from the heat of like Winston-Salem and Greensboro and just pretty much stay up on the mountain, during the summertime. And that certainly helped boost attendance here a lot. So it's small. Let's see what else we have here that I can tell you.
And you 4-Hers, or moms and dads, think of questions if you want to ask.
If you got any. And two, if you ever go, you probably won't, but if you ever go to a little town called Fork, which is on the, Yadkin River, near a town called Coolamy, that's where the other Saratown Plantation is, and there's also a church that looks just like this, called Church of the Ascension, that another church that the Hairstons pretty much planted there. And that church still exists. But they've had kind of a resurrection in terms of membership because that's like a suburb of Winston now.
Yeah.
So they get a fair amount of people that we
I believe it's in Fort Bixby Road.
Fort
Bixby Road.
I think so, yeah.
I've delivered to it before.
Oh, have you?
I'm a UPS driver, so I've delivered there before to that church. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Does it look like this one on the outside and everything?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Love to see that one.
they all were kind of the same, these kind of carpenter Gothic. And there was a man that wrote a book about these carpenter Gothic churches. So almost all of them that were built in the late 19th century, a lot of churches kind of look just like this. You can see it's called a cruciform. So it kind of forms a cross, right? So there's the top of the cross. This kind of chancel provides the middle of the cross. And then the center of the aisle provides a cross. So everybody's sitting like in a cruciform and a cross.
I like that.
That's kind of the idea.
Now
And
these.
then everything high,
Oh yeah. Now these two little sections of pews, is that just for more congregants, or is that a choir section, or what is?
Choir.
Choir. Okay.
Choir and attendance, or whatever. And then up here on the sanctuary, you see that weird chair with the funny triangle thing on the top?
Yeah.
The bishop sits there when it can be a woman or a man now in this church, can sit there. That thing on the top that looks like a triangle is called a mitre. That's, if you've ever seen a bishop, they wear a weird hat. And then the other chair on the right is for the priest when they're here. But we can actually take that mitre off when the bishop is not here, and anybody that wants can sit there. There's nothing sacred about these chairs. But that's how that works. But all that stuff up front is all original. The altar was original, made here. We don't know who built the church, like who the workmen were that built it. We just know, the families that kind of funded it and so forth. But all the kind of the credence table on the right, the altar, everything except for that lamp, is pretty much original to the church. The lecterns and everything else are all original.
Now, I apologize, I'm gonna have to ask you this again, but when was it built? I forgot what you said.
It was finally completed in 1886.
1886,
Took
okay.
3 years. And when he held his first service here, there were still no windows. I guess they had boards in there or something.
Yeah.
Because they were, you didn't want to put in a regular window if you really wanted to get a stained glass window. And I think they had already had some arrangement with St. Paul's to get their old windows. And shortly after it was built, though, those stained glass windows on the top were installed. And unfortunately, we're trying to raise money now. All the stained glass windows need to be redone, which is a major undertaking. Yeah. So we're working on that. But, and if you've ever been to St. Paul's in Winston, it's their second church, but it's a stone Gothic type church. But they have St. Paul's has lots of funding, so they have really beautiful stained glass windows. We got their leftovers. Yeah, that's right.
Well, let me quiz the kids just a minute. Oh, I'm sorry, Alicia, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
So you said this used to be a Catholic church, correct?
No, it's always been an Episcopal church, but the Episcopal Church sees ourselves as Catholic. Not Roman Catholic, but Catholic. So distinct from other Protestant churches in the Roman Catholic Church, we see ourselves as distinctly different. So when we split from Rome, we didn't give up like most Protestant churches said, no, we're not going to do that, we're not going to do it. We kept all those things. The main reason that the English church split from Rome originally had to do with some of the things, and the abuses of the church, but it mainly existed because King Henry wanted to leave his wife, and the Pope refused to grant him an annulment.
It's true
right?
stuff.
Yeah, we grew up Catholic, and we do not see like any Catholic churches anywhere around here. I mean, we go by Christian anyway.
Yeah.
We don't have a denomination.
Right.
We still are Christian.
I think King has the only Roman Catholic church in Stokes County.
Yeah.
We do see a lot more unity though within our community from up north. There's only, let's just say, 2 Catholic churches and a handful of other churches, but we're here, and I can throw a stone from my house and hit about 30 different churches.
Yeah.
We visited these churches, and there's only about 10, 5, 4 people, and it's really just kind of disheartening seeing the community divided so much and not together in Christ.
There are a lot of small churches. I would say in Stokes County and this whole region of North Carolina, the majority of churches are some type of Baptist affiliated church, which can be regular Southern Baptist, or even on this street we have Primitive Baptist.
Yeah.
In the old writings, which we still have, when the priests would come down they were trying to plant churches up here. Some of the writing is pretty funny. They said these are some of the most unchurched people we ever. It was pretty wild.
Yeah.
Here, right. People did what they wanted. Like even for years, before the Civil War, an Episcopal priest would come, they would travel, or a Methodist priest, and even a Baptist minister. They would just travel, like maybe a Baptist minister would have like a revival, like for a couple weeks, and move on to the next town. And it took a while for churches to be planted here. Very independent people here did whatever they wanted, I think.
I read a lot of the Moravian records from the early Moravian missionaries who came to this area, and in the late 1700s, one of them, George Sello, said that this area right here in Walnut Cove, it wasn't Walnut Cove then, said this is the darkest of them all. That's what he wrote in his diary. He said wild spirits are there.
That's right. And I guess there were still native peoples here, when the Moravians arrived. And for some reason they settled on that area they called Methadra.
Yeah.
Instead of each. But one thing that's interesting, and it's kind of, I think he was Presbyterian, but R.J. Reynolds, when he came down from Virginia, almost planted his tobacco warehouse in Walnut Cove, which I think at the time was called Lash's Store. he
It-
referred
yeah.
to it. Lash, was that old name, and this area really was all his.
Yeah.
I think at one time were his family's.
Yeah, we own the land, down on Main Street where the old Dodson Hotel was.
Right.
That was all plantation land. That was
Yeah.
all Lash Plantation,
Yeah.
all of it.
Yep, and the Lashes and the Hairstons, I guess they got along. They were both at the time Episcopalians, and so they really funded them. But the widow of Peter Hairston, Fanny, she was obviously very into church, and so she committed lots of money to it. I think at one time she was paying the priest a whopping $60 a month in 1880 or 1890, which is a lot of money.
Back then, yeah.
Right, to make sure he came at least once a month here, but he also would go to Elkin and Madison and different areas, the priest, it was a pretty hard job.
Can I ask, you said you are in mission, is that what you said?
Yeah, like if you're a full church, you're called a parish, right? And you have a rector. But if you're a mission, you tend to be smaller and you call your head priest a vicar. And you're pretty much controlled by the bishop, Unlike the Roman Catholic Church, an Episcopal Church, one of the things that's different about us is the laity, the members, the non-clergy. They get to make a lot of decisions. We can say, hey, we don't like this priest. Bishop, can you send us another priest, right? So we have a little bit more say, but we're a mission, so everything we do, the bishop kind of decides what we can do. And actually, our bishop is coming on Sunday to do it. But most Episcopal churches, like in Winston, are parishes. They're full parishes. They're big enough. But sadly, it doesn't give us any more money from them. So we have to sustain that all ourselves.
I was going to ask you kids, and some of you may know, and at least it'd be interesting to know, like with your background, like this is new to me. Y'all, do you kids see how all of those are under all
kneelers?
Is that new? Was that in the Catholic Church, Alicia? Okay, because I never grew up in a church that had that. I was going to ask you to explain, like what.
Yeah, so, at, just like in a Roman Catholic church, sometimes you're standing, right? Sometimes you're kneeling, typically you kneel to pray, right? Or to get absolution or whatever, forgiveness, you're kneeling. You're standing up to rejoice, maybe sing. You're sitting to maybe listen to a homily or a sermon. So we have these, in a lot of churches, they'll have like automatic kneelers, not automatic, but full kneelers that come. In this church, they've always been, I don't know what they were initially, I sure assume some kind of straw wrapped in fabric. But now we just have these little kneelers to kneel because it's a lot of up and down,
Tough on the knees on a pine floor, right? As opposed
right,
to.
That's
Yeah.
right. And, kids like them, they can put them up and stack them up. I've seen little
So,
children do it.
is that like a padded area for the kneeling, for the?
That's right.
communion? Okay.
And typically, during the pandemic, it's a little bit different, but at this church, typically, because we're so small, people come up to take communion, the bread and the wine, and they just go up there, kneel. The priest administers the host, the bread, and then someone else, a chalice bearer, gives the wine. During the pandemic, instead of doing that, we did it all standing. Like, in a big Roman Catholic or Episcopal church, to make it go faster, it's typically standing, just come up,